Hello and welcome to another pattern recognition video featuring simplification patterns. I had a good response on the last video dealing with these simplification patterns, so I thought I'd do another one because it's pretty important. Basically, I'm going to do about 10 chess puzzles that you can solve along with me. And why is simplification important? Well, basically, if there's complications going on in the game, like in this example here, the queen and the rook, they're piling up on the black king. So black is ahead in material by this extra bishop and an extra pawn, it looks like. So black would like to simplify down into a one endgame. So how do you think he would go about doing that? So with black to move, what would you do in this position? And you can pause the video at any time if you need to think longer. But black has to act pretty urgently here because there's a threat, possibly of moving down here, checking the king. And then that's not going to be good for black. The rook could be captured next. But anyway, it's black's turn to move. So you want to look at checks first as they're most forcing. And if you don't keep an eye on checks, a lot of times you could have a nasty surprise. So here we can surprise white with a queen check. But what check is better? Do we want to move the queen here, here, or here? One of these is best. So take a look at this. We'll move the queen here, delivering a check. The king will be forced to run. And then we can move our queen down here with a check, forking the king and the queen at the same time. So white would be forced to capture, and then we can just recapture with the pawn. So check, check, and then we capture with the pawn, and now we're into a one end game. We basically have the rook, and this extra bishop, and an extra pawn. So this is a good example of trading down, simplifying into a winning endgame. And, if you're not familiar with pattern recognition as well, that's why I'm going to try and do 9 more of these puzzles that you can solve along with me. And as far as pattern recognition, you can do any type of tactics, preferably more simple, lower rated tactics, depending on your level. Because as you get into more complicated tactics, it's maybe more calculation involved and not as much pattern recognition. Of course, you'll still recognize patterns, but you want easier problems. So today I have 500 to 1,000 rated problems. So in this next one, the knight has just jumped forward here, doing what? Attacking our queen. Of course, we could capture the knight. But our queen is under attack. And if it's captured and this rook moves up here, then our other rook can be captured. So, what might be better here? Well, maybe since our queen is the most powerful piece, we have to deal with that first. And it's under attack by the knight. So perhaps we attack their queen first. Now, if you're solving these puzzles, first you want to look for checks, and there are no immediate checks against white's king. So then you want to look for captures. Of course we can capture this knight, but as I mentioned, if we capture, they go after our queen, we recapture, then they grab this rook. So maybe we want to target their most valuable piece first, and we're trying to simplify down into a one endgame. And when you're doing that, especially if you're just solving a random puzzle, you have to take a look at the material. So our opponent has what, 6 pawns, we have 5. So we're down by a pawn. So we have to be careful. If we make even trades, we'll be down a pawn in the endgame. So, we could start by taking the queen. Then what? We have to watch out for checks that our opponent may have against us. If we take that queen, they could capture here with an immediate check. And then if we capture back, they would have to take our queen. So let's take a look at that. If we capture, we have to watch out, and look at this threat of them capturing with check. Then what? We recapture. And then they have to worry about taking the queen back. So that would give us time to take the knight. So I think that works. Capture, capture, and then now we grab the knight, and we've simplified down into a one endgame. And also we have wrecked the pawns a little bit here. They have doubled isolated pawns, which will be easy targets in the endgame. We could have a threat of going up here, targeting this pawn, and keeping an eye on this pawn as well. And if we target this pawn over here, the rook would have a hard time protecting that, of course, because this bishop is covering that square. All right, on to the next problem here. We had checked the black king, so it runs towards the center. So now we're looking for ways to simplify down into a one endgame. So let's look at material. We have 4 pawns versus 5, so we're ahead by a pawn now. Material. We both have a pair of bishops and a knight, queen and rooks, so we're just ahead by a pawn at the moment. How do we further simplify? Well, if we try and capture this knight, our queen could be captured. But would that be so bad? Because then we would be attacking their queen. So maybe that works. All right, perhaps that's the way to go. We do have to watch out that this pawn isn't pushed forward and traps our bishop over here. If we go into an endgame. Actually, we could, if they capture our queen, we could recapture with our bishop. That's a possibility. All right, so we're looking to trade down. So if we take the knight, if they capture our queen, we capture their queen. Now the queen could just recapture, and move out of the line of fire here. And then our queen would be under attack. Oh, we do maybe have, if the queen captures, we have to look at checks as well. Maybe that would be dangerous. All right, so quite a bit going on here. I set these puzzles up at 500 to 1,000 rated. So this one's a little trickier. I'm still thinking we grab that knight. If they decide to capture with the queen, then what? Do we check? And the king can't run. All right, I think that's the way to go. So capture. All right, so they do go after our queen. So we most likely have to capture their queen. All right, now here, instead of an immediate capture, we might want to check first, as I said. But then they could block. Then we grab their rook. So, they don't like that move. Maybe they just wanted us to capture here. And then we still have that threat of going here. Now, I had a viewer ask, how can you replay problems that you've already done? So I'm on chess.com going through these puzzles. There is a section where you can go in the statistics area, and if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll be able to see all the puzzles that you've done, and you can go over your puzzles, click on them, and go back over them. Especially since we got that one move wrong in the sequence, you can review those. When you're doing your own puzzle. All right, on to the next problem. So what do we have here? A knight jumps forward, knight to f6. And our goal is to simplify. And this is another kind of complicated position. There's a lot going on. We have 3 pawns. They have 5. And this is the rest of the material even. So let's see. Pair of bishops and a knight versus a pair of knights and a bishop. Okay. Well, how do we want to do this? And, this is where you're going to have to do a little more calculation. This is what I was talking about. If the problems get a little more complicated, then there's more calculation involved. But as you get better with recognizing patterns and practicing this stuff, you'll be able to sift through the complications and calculations a little bit better. All right, so we could just capture here. That's a possibility. What happens if we go after the rook with the bishop? All right, so a lot to figure out here. Do we have any good checks? I don't see any checks that are going to do anything. We don't even have any good checks available. So we have to look for captures, unprotected pieces. So the knight's protecting this bishop. The bishop's protecting the knight. But we do have 2 attackers on that knight. So I'm thinking maybe we take the more valuable rook with our bishop. And then if they recapture, we can take here. We have to watch out though, because if we take, they don't have to take with the rook, they could capture with the knight and have a discovered attack on our bishop. But then again, we would be attacking their bishop as well. So that looks the way to go. We're going to take the rook. Okay. I apologize. You have to watch out for those checks. So That's what I mentioned before. Do not overlook the checks. So we're pretty much forced now to what? Take the knight. So the obvious move is that. Okay. Now they captured. We might as well capture with the king, it looks like. All right, so now we have this check, the fork. So they're going to go after our rook. We want to protect that. So we probably have to move here and protect our rook. Okay, now I would imagine we just go after the knight and attack the bishop at the same time. Okay, and then we just come out ahead. I know that was a little more complicated. There were a lot of captures going on, and generally you want to try and figure out as much in your head as possible. But sometimes the moves work themselves out, especially with that check, forcing our king to capture. So hopefully you did well there. Let's move on to the next problem. So what was this? A capture? So rook up here, the obvious move is to recapture, but should we use the pawn and wreck our pawns, or just use the queen? Oh, probably just the queen. That would help us simplify, because if we capture with the queen, we'll be forking their rook and their queen. Now, of course, they could capture ours. Okay, so once again, a lot going on here. If we capture, they could capture here, but then we could capture their rook. And the only thing that could be done then is to block with the queen. All right, and as far as material, we have 7 pawns versus their what? 6. And we have an extra rook. So, I don't know, that looks good to just go ahead and capture. So now they're just going to go after the queen anyway. So, we're pretty much forced to capture there. But, we have the extra rook and an extra pawn for an advantage in the end game. Okay, I'm going to try and do 5 more problems where we simplify down to a winning end game, or some type of end game advantage, or towards the end game. Okay, so what do we have here? Knight is blocking the attack on the queen, trying to prevent us from exchanging down. This is funny. This looks similar to a game that I played recently where I had the white pieces. I wonder if this, if chess.com pulls these problems from games played, by all of us on chess.com. All right, so with the goal of exchanging down, do we go here? Just take? If the queen takes, then we capture with the bishop, and then we're attacking this as well. So that's probably what we want to do, capture with the queen. And then now we grab this, and we're ahead once again. Rook versus knight, and we have an extra pawn here, pawn majority in the end game, and we can push that pawn and try and get a passed pawn over here, so we should be winning. You still have to watch out for the tricky knight moves in the end. But on to the next problem. So, all right, what do we have here? The rook is just captured a pawn, so with the goal of exchanging down, simplifying into a one endgame, we probably should just capture. Do we just capture like that? The knight would recapture. Is there any, we have to look at checks as well. So is there any kind of crazy check, where we go here? Oh, yes, maybe that works even better. So we capture the knight, which is with a check, which is protecting this rook over here. So then we can capture the rook and just be ahead material in the end there. All right, so capture, and then we grab this, and now we're winning. We do have to watch out for these dangerous pawns, but I think our rook could handle that. Because now our opponent could start pushing this pawn. Then what? We could probably back away with our rook and block this pawn when it's trying to move forward. And then that'll also keep the king from being able to protect over here. We should be able to capture and start picking these pawns off with our king and our rook. All right, 3 more problems to go. The rook just centralizes, attacking the queen. How do we simplify down? Well, we could just let our queen be captured and go after their queen. And then this capture will be with a check, though. I think that'll be all right. But before we do that, let's look at material. So we have 5 pawns versus their 4. So we're ahead by 1 pawn. But we're down. We're actually down a knight. So, that throws a wrench in the works. What can we do about that? Oh, okay. Look for those checks. Just always remember to look for checks first before you move. Also, look for checks on both sides, you and your opponent. You don't want to make a good move and then overlook a check by your opponent on the next move. But here we can capture with check. The king or knight will have to recapture, and then that gives us time to pick off their queen. And then we would be ahead by a rook for a knight, and we have the extra pawn. So capture gives us time to grab the queen, and now we're ahead. We each have a knight and bishop. They have the knight for our rook, but we have 5 pawns versus their 4, and that should be enough of an advantage to win in the endgame. All right, 2 more puzzles to go. What can we do here? Knight has just come forward, threatening to capture here. All these pieces are lining up on our knight. All right, let's look at material before we start trading down. We have 7 pawns versus 7, so pawns are even. Material, we each have a pair of bishops and a knight. No, all the pieces. So we have both knights, both bishops. Okay, so material's even. We want to start trading down. So, that usually involves captures. We'll take a look and see if we have any good checks. I don't see any good checks. So let's look at the checks as we move into the, deeper into the problem. So if we capture here, if they just recapture, then our bishop will be targeting that pawn. But we have to watch out for this capture with check. Our queen could capture, but then their queen could capture, forcing our king to recapture, and then that gives our opponent time to push their pawn forward. And then we would just be even. So, or would we? We have this threat of moving the bishop up here and targeting that. So that appears good. The only other option is, capture with the, well, not the only option, but do we capture with the bishop first? I don't know. I think the knight capture is better. So let's try that. Capture. Okay, now we're forced to recapture here. King recaptures. And we grab the pawn, but now the rook is trapped as well. Unless they give up their knight, and then move the rook. But then we would just grab a free knight. All right, the final problem. Here we go. Pawn is pushed forward, gaining space here on the king side, kind of keeping things even, freezing this pawn from moving unless, it'll be captured. So what do we have going on? How can we go about simplifying into a one endgame? Now we have 5 pawns versus their 4, and we have this pair of pawns over here on the queen side, which is, quite dangerous. Well, maybe we could go after this, and then that rook will no longer be protected. If the queen recaptures, then we can recapture. So that's a possibility, but then, I don't know, that would allow a check down here. Let's see if I'm looking at this right. Capture, capture, we capture, but then the queen can check us. And then what? Oh no, that would be a check. So, once again, this proves how important checks are. So, capture. If the queen captures and we capture, we're pinning the queen to the king, and so that would force an exchange. And if this rook, there's not much else this rook can do. I don't think it can go anywhere else. So that looks good. Capture. And then the queen trades her. That was forced. And then we're ahead, winning here. So 3 pawns versus 3, and we have these 2 extra pawns. And this pawn is unstoppable here. If you use the square of the pawn to see if the king can get into that position. So even if the king goes here, the pawn will be unstoppable. It'll just march up to the promotion square because the opponent's king cannot enter that square of the pawn as it's moving up the board. All right. Well, I hope these simplification puzzles helped you. Remember to go over puzzles more than once, because if you just look at these once and then just completely forget them, it won't. It'll be harder to burn those patterns into your long-term memory. But Whether you're solving puzzles out of a book, on an app, on chess.com or wherever, try to go over the puzzles more than once. That way, you're more likely to remember those patterns and be able to incorporate them into your games in the future. All right, well, feel free to leave comments as always. Like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.